Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. How's it going? Today, we're continuing talking about what is horror, talking about monsterness. We're ending Section A today. Tomorrow we'll be going on to the horror tale. We're going to go back to Noel Carroll. We just finished with Noel Carroll last time, but we're going to go back to Noel Carroll and talking about what he talks about the horror tale. Today, we're putting Noel Carroll to the side because we finished what he said about monsterness, and we're going to go on to Stephen King from Danse Macabre, talk about what he had to say about monsterness and what it means to be a horror, what it takes to be a horror tale, what it takes for a tale to be a horror tale. And we're also going to talk about Howard Phillips Lovecraft, supernatural horror and literature, a little bit about what he talks about on that subject of what it means to be horror and what it takes for a tale to be a horror tale. Different views. Some similarities between these two. Neither of these guys are going to be as exact in or scientific as Noel Carroll or logical. Of course, Noel Carroll is a professor, doctor of philosophy, very logical in his thinking, very exact. These guys are fiction writers. They don't have to be as exact. They aren't trained to be as exact. Not saying they're sloppy or anything like that. They're just not as scientifically broken down every little thing. Noel Carroll says we're going to talk about fusion monster or fusion now, and then he talks about fusion. Then he says we're going to talk about fission, and this is what it means to be fission. And then he said temporal fission, spatial fission. Very exact. A little bit more going off on tangents. King likes to go off on tangents. It makes for an enjoyable book. You could sit down and read this as a book and just read it the same way you would any other Stephen King book. This is more textbook style. It's not something you'd sit down and read for pleasure unless you're me. Well, you could. It's very well written. It's very readable. It's not as readable as this. The difference between Noel Carroll and Stephen King. Tackling the same subject matter, he's going to be very exact. He's a philosopher, quite a bit of renown. He's going to be a lot more readable. He's an author of Stephen King's stature. We understand I hope you understand the point. I'm not knocking either of these guys. Lovecraft. The only deal with Lovecraft is he basically only talks about what it takes to be horror and his definitions of horror, or what a horror tale. In the introduction. So very little to be talked about with Lovecraft, and he's sort of it's not one of the points he wants to make, so of course he doesn't talk about it as much. I'm just trying to piece together what he does say to see what his views probably are. I'm sure that other people would probably have a better idea. S.T. Joshi could probably say, this is where you find Lovecraft's views of horror, and he could probably point it out really quick. Joshi is, of course, his biographer. So, and I just ordered a book by Joshi, Evolution of the Weird Tale. So, hopefully, I'll be getting that soon and be able to read that and probably do another video on that one as well. But enough of that. Right now, we're going to talk about Stephen King. This is from Danse Macabre. What he talks about when he talks about monstrosity and what it takes to be a horror tale is going to be mostly in his section on Tales of the Hook. I'm in the British version. I recommended the American modern version because I had the essay What's Scary. I still do, but so the page numbers may be off. I'm around 40, say 40 to 60, I guess would be the general area. 40 to 65, a big 10-page stretch. I don't think any of them. It's usually like 45 to 52, really, is what or 55 is what I'm dealing with here. But if we're going over that area, Tales of the Hook isn't a big section. And he's talking about other stuff that I'm not going to go into right now either, because there's a Tales of the Hook section in the horror tale. After we're done with this video, the next video is going to be on the horror tale. I'm going to go back and do Carol's first, because it's more exact and it has some interesting ideas. And then we'll go over King's for quite a few days, because for King, the monster dictates what kind of tale it's going to be. Now that's a pretty reasonable assumption. There's aspects of vampire tales that are, if you're dealing with a vampire monster, you're going to have aspects of that tale, so on and so forth. And same with werewolf tales, or creature without a name, or ghosts, or bad place, which is his other one, sort of. It's his half one. We'll go over that more, I promise. So for a lot of King, the kind of monster dictates what kind of story we're talking about. So, for the most part, we'll be talking about King's monsters and stories together in the horror tale, the next section we're going to be going over. What he says about monsters independently of that, he talks a bit about it in his Tale of the Hook section. Let's talk about monsters. He even says it in part 3 of Tales of the Hook. He says, "Well, let's talk about monsters. Let's talk monsters. What exactly what is a monster?" And he has the answer here. Well, perhaps more than anything else, the horror story or horror movie says it's okay to join the mob, to become a total tribal being, and to destroy the outsider. Now, the outsider is easy enough to understand. It's us. We are the normal types, and then there's the outsiders. There's the threat from outside. There's also the threat from inside, which is more werewolfy. We'll deal with that later, of course. But for the most part, for your standard run-of-the-mill, and of course Tale of the Hook, horror monster, it's something from the outside. Run, or it's something from the outside, kill it. Those are your two reactions of horror movie. Get your pitchforks and torches. And kill the beast. I got that song stuck in my head now from Beauty and the Beast. Great. Thanks, brain. My goodness. Ooh, hot water. That's good stuff. As a tribal being, as a unurbane person, if you're in a tribe, easiest to describe, if you're in high school, you're in your tribe. Anyone outside your tribe is potentially a threat. And they either have to be, it's an outsider get it, or it's an outsider run, depending on how big of a threat it is. I'm not saying that all high schoolers are, ready to kill, but there's, get it doesn't mean necessarily hurt it physically. It could be snarky or be insulting or whatever. But a lot of people who had these experience in tribal experiences in high school. It's fairly similar. But the tribal being, you want to destroy the outsider, or run from the outsider if you can't destroy it. It's okay to join the mob. It's, Frankenstein's monster is not a creature you want to take on alone. You want, when you know that there's a Frankenstein's monster out there, you gotta rally the troops. You have to get everybody together, and then you'll feel safe enough to attack it. Another example of the outsider. To understand the outsider, King wants to go to Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. Hot water. Explain the outsider. It has never been done better or more literally than Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery, where the entire concept of the outsider is symbolic, created by nothing more than a black circle colored on a slip of paper. But there's no symbolism in the rain of stones which ends the story. The victim's own child pitches in as the mother dies screaming, "It's not fair, it's not fair." Now, that was a huge spoiler, but then again, I read Dance Macabre before I read The Lottery. I promise you, if that didn't spoil it for you, you can read The Lottery now knowing that the mother is the one that dies, and enjoy it just as much as I did, which is a heck of a lot. I recommend Shirley Jackson very, very much. And The Lottery, too. The Lottery is very good. The Lottery and other stories, there's a lot of other stories that are just weird and not necessarily maybe horror, but weird and atmospheric and cool. But for outsider, The Lottery does it best. The basis of a lottery is a town in your state, USA, just whatever town, a normal suburb. It seemed like a cul-de-sac type thing. It was pretty suburban. Has their lottery day every year, and they're all gathered around ready for the lottery, and the male of each household goes up, and they all draw straws, or they all take pieces of paper, one of which has a black circle on it. And whichever family has the black circle, the whole family goes up. Whichever father or male figure draws the black circle, the whole family goes up. And each member of the family draws papers again, and whoever draws the black circle wins the lottery, or loses the lottery because they're immediately stoned with pelting rain of stones, which ends the story and ends the victim's life. And in the case of the lottery, the mother's life. And so she screams, "It's not fair, it's not fair," but by lottery, she was the outsider. She was drawn to be the outsider. And even her daughter pitches in and throws rocks at her mom, and assumes her husband does too. And even the little child who can barely lift the rock just sort of chucks it in the general direction because it's quite small. It's being held for most of the book. I don't know if they have given age. It's been a while since I've read it. But drawn by lot is the idea of the outsider, and then sacrificed. For lack of a better word, they did put it in terms of sacrifice because the people talked about how they believe that the lottery is what causes their crops to grow. So it's this idea of sacrifice, anyway. So the monstrosity, for the most part, is the outsider. Not trusting outsiderness. Monstrosity fascinate. This is page 55. That was page 47, 48, the last slide. In the British version, as I said before. I bought this in pounds. In no, this side. UK £5.99 pounds. So the page numbers might be off a bit. Monstrosity fascinates us. One more time. I'm bidding another drink of hot water. There we go. Monstrosity fascinates us because it appeals to the conservative Republican in the three-piece suit, which resides within all of us. That's definitely political, Steve. Stephen is also Richard Bachman, and Richard Bachman can get pretty left-wing. Blaze is actually darn near socialistic, or very pro-union at the very least. But, you know, the idea, without getting too political, I don't want to get political, because I'll just cause flaming. I should have just cut this quote out entirely. The conservative ideal of exclusionism, exclusivity, xenophobia even. I don't want to get too political. I don't want to get political at all. Oh. Let's go with this left-wing stereotype. The left-wing stereotype, if they saw Frankenstein, they would welcome it with open arms and give it a fruit basket and free health insurance. Let's just, you know, since I'm on the left and I don't want to insult the right, let me just insult the left. If by seeing Dracula, you know, they don't want to fight Dracula. They want to, you know, the left wing would want to, you know, help it or whatever. Try to introduce it to a vegetarian lifestyle. I'm going crazy. Alright, no. The Republican, of course, would want to destroy it. Maybe not Frankenstein. Frankenstein has there's a degree of sympathy towards Frankenstein. But it still needs to be destroyed. It's still an aberration. It's still the outsider. It's still a threat. It is... What's the term? Yeah, the outsider. It is a threat. It is threat from outside. Being it's a collection of body parts that's been reanimated. It isn't supposed to be. It is something that isn't supposed to be. It needs to be destroyed. The Republican side would be right up for destroying it. The left wing would be like, oh, actually, he does mention this in another section. He talks about political horror movies. In the 50s, there was a couple of political horror movies, one of which was, you know, there's the Republican side, the militaristic, you know, if the monster from the giant man-eating carrot from outer space comes down, and the lefty scientist wants to find out how to communicate with it. If we can just communicate with it, we can learn so much about its society and yada yada yada. In the meantime, it's killing everybody. And the general guy says, let's find a way to kill it. And finally, the scientist runs up to it and says, "What do you want? Please tell me what you want. Open arms. Here, I come unarmed." And he gets batted away by the giant carrot from outer space. And then he goes after the army guys, but the army guys set up a trap and fry him. The army guys would be representing the conservative ideal, the Republicans. Now, yeah, here's a good one. This is page 56. When we discuss monstrosity, we're expressing our faith and belief in the norm and watching for the mutant. The writer of horror fiction is neither more nor less than the agent of the status quo. The mutant, the outsider, the freak. The horror writer is the agent of the status quo. It is for normalcy. Watching for the mutant is actually a quote from which one was it? It's a quote from Wyndham, John Wyndham's book, The Chrysalids. Watch thou for the mutant. It's actually also on page 56, the same as this. The plaques in the protagonist's house, say, "Only the image of God is man, keeps pure the stock of the Lord. In purity our salvation, blessed is the norm, and watch thou for the mutant." So King's going to go on from this to talk about, but what is monstrosity? How outside does a person have to be, or does a thing have to be monstrous? The easy examples are, the giant carrot from outer space that eats people, or even Frankenstein, reanimated, or Dracula, even more so because it's pure evil. But what about X? And then he'll say, what about Freaks? There's the movie Freaks from 1932, Todd Browning, where freaks were sort of the hero, but they're certainly disturbing and creepy to look at, and stuff like that. Are they monsters? Pardon me. He poses the question. It's not something, it's an outsider thing. Maybe they're not enough of a threat. They certainly are creepy. You could see if you saw them as a threat, would they be monsters? King doesn't necessarily say that have the exact definition of monster like Carroll does, for point of fact, because he wrote the book 10 years before, or 9 years before Carroll wrote Philosophy of Horror. But he doesn't necessarily say that a monster has to be something that science doesn't believe exists. He could say something's just really creepy and really threatening, which is a pretty good definition. Not one that I'm saying that King's going to go along with, but for the most part, it's a pretty good definition. If freaks are creepy, if they give us the creeps as it gives the conservative Republican in a three-piece suit that resides in all of us, and there is one in all of us, if it gives them the creeps and we find it a threat, is it a monster? And he asks, well, what about morbidly obese people? Not really just very large people. I mean, morbidly obese. When does that become a monster? I think I have the answer to this because Actually, I found it. It's called Pearl the Record Keeper. This is from the first Blade movie with Wesley Snipes. Was it Wesley Snipes? Yeah. Um, it's a very morbidly obese vampire. Um, like it pools. It's named Pearl, but it's a he. He pools, and he's not exactly mobile. I think they fed him just by dripping blood on him. It was kind of weird. And then they roasted him with a UV lamp, which seemed weird because it's sunlight UV lamp. Anyway, that was Blade's doing. Anyway, so morbidly obese people, how big do they have to be monstrous? Well, let's go further. Hair lips. He mentions. He doesn't say that. He doesn't think that these people are monsters. Obviously, people with hair lips, or acne run amok. He says that I Was a Teenage Frankenstein is essentially acne run amok. Or he even goes down to left-handedness, which in French is sinistre. Or it's spelled that way. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. Sinistre is French for left-handed, and it's the same word as sinister, which is demonic and sinister. It's another word for evil. Interesting thinking on that. Let's see. Oh, about to transition to Lovecraft. And that's my transition. Hey, very smooth transition, huh? That's the general gist of King. He goes over what horror movies make us feel. They feel, we have to get together and attack it or run away from it if we're alone. The Republican in a three-piece suit, the idea of the outsider. Faith and belief in the norm and watching for the mutant. Agents of the status quo. Lovecraft is a little bit different. Lovecraft is even more conservative than Carroll. If King is more open and accepting than Carroll, Lovecraft is less. King, he wants to include things like Jaws. It's an outsider. It's a threat. It's part of horror. He wants to include things like Psycho with Norman Bates. It's an outsider. It's got even impure and monstrous in some ways. It's creepy. He's creepy, Norman. And he's certainly a threat. And he probably wants to include Cujo, which is one of his own. It's the outsider in some ways. It's a little bit more difficult to understand, but a rabid dog would be quite significantly different than a regular dog. It's an outsider, and certainly a threat. And Carroll wouldn't allow for Jaws or Psycho or Cujo because they're not monsters. Because modern science admits to believing in sharks, even large ones, schizophrenics, and rabid dogs, rabid Saint Bernards. Right. Lovecraft, of course, didn't have to deal with Jaws or Cujo or Psycho. He was writing He wrote this in 1927, which was 51 for Psycho, I think. Maybe a bit later. In the 50s. It was the 50s for Psycho. Jaws was the late 60s, mid 60s, mid to late 60s, and Cujo was 83. Yeah. So he didn't really have to deal with that. He was basically only dealing with supernatural, hence the title, supernatural horror in literature. And in his introduction, he talks about cosmic fear. Cosmic fear is the sense you get from a good horror story, a real horror story. He's exclusive in the same way that Tolstoy is exclusive. Tolstoy will say that only art is art that is expressing an idea from the artist to the audience. I'm very Tolstoyan myself, and I'm do get into excluding things when I'm talking about philosophy of art. Not as much as Tolstoy, but I do exclude things. Non-art. Art falsely called. Lovecraft's going to be talking about horror falsely called. Even stuff that, Carol would say is horror. He probably wouldn't say it's very good. But Lovecraft, for it to be horror, you have to have a certain atmosphere to cause cosmic fear. Actually, on page 15, this is his definition. Wrong buttons. A certain atmosphere of breathless, unexplainable dread of outer, unknown forces. Again, outer is in both of these guys. The outsider and outer forces. I do have another Lovecraft quote. I'm not sure if this would be more elucidating. Also page 15. Well, actually, I think this might be a little bit earlier. Maybe page 14? Page 14, actually. So scratch that on the bottom. Because we remember pain and the menace of death more vividly than pleasure, and because our feelings towards the beneficent aspects of the unknown have been first captured and formalized by conventional religious rituals, it has fallen to the lot of the darker and more maleficent side of cosmic mystery to figure chiefly in our popular supernatural folklore. This borders on... Actually, is that part of the quote? One second. This is off topic. Sorry. No, it's not. It's probably a quote from in this. There's this Lovecraft documentary that I recommend. Actually, it's available on YouTube, called Fear of the Unknown. A lot of great writers are in there. S.T. Joshi, of course, his biographer, is in it quite a bit. Neil Gaiman, who writes a lot of, well, maybe not a lot of horror, but he writes dark fantasy, modern fantasy. And Peter Straub, who writes great ghost stories and other horror books. Ramsey Campbell, another great horror writer of today. Started in the 70s, probably the earliest starting one of them. And a few others. Caitlin Kiernan's in it. No. Is it Caitlin Kiernan? I think so. I'm not sure. I don't remember. My apologies. Neil Gaiman makes a good point about why Lovecraft is so influential on today's horror. He's the first one to talk about horror, or he really formalized horror worldview as it's not a beneficent place. It's not a... The world isn't really structured to be good for you. You know, in the Lovecraft universe, there is no benevolent God in his heaven looking out for the good people. The good people in Lovecraft's world often die horrible, horrible deaths for no reason whatsoever. And that's because in Lovecraft's universe, the world is not happy to have you around. It is, ambivalent at best, maleficent at worst. Is sometimes actively out to get you. In Lovecraft's world, the elder gods are the ones running the show, and they're not really that concerned with mankind's survival. At all. They don't care if it happens. Sometimes they want it to not happen, for mankind not to survive. So, this is Gaiman's point about Lovecraft. And Lovecraft is sort of backing it up here. He says, in the good parts of the unknown have been captured and formalized by religious rituals. The monopoly of the good coming out of the universe from unknown places is formalized by God. If you win the lottery, someone's going to say to you, "You've been blessed." Or if a tornado smashes your house, but you're still alive, someone's going to say to you, "You've been blessed." It's some sort of religious ritual has said, okay, something good has happened to you, or something bad has happened to you, but you didn't die. So when the bad stuff coming out of the universe, that's the realm that it falls to the folklore people to take that. When bad stuff is going on, they want to cause cosmic fear. Cosmic being the world, the universe, the cosmos. When that is out to get you, you're not saying that's religion, unless you're Job. But if Job was written today, it would be a horror movie. When the universe is out to get you, you're in the realm of horror, not the realm of religion. If the universe is out to help you, you're in the realm of religion. Religion has that on lockdown. Now I do have two quotes side by side by King and Lovecraft that show their similarities. King says, "Let me further suggest that it is not the physical or mental aberration in itself which horrifies us, but rather the lack of order which these aberrations seem to imply." I'm going to just take a look here. We love and need the concept of monstrosity because it's a reaffirmation of the order that we all crave as human beings. King, of course, is quite a bit after Lovecraft, so he's certainly following in that footsteps a bit. And Lovecraft's a malign and particular suspension of or defeat of those fixed laws of nature, which are our only safeguard against the assaults of chaos and the daemons of unplumbed space. When monstrosity happens, when the universe is out to get you, either in this sense, in the horror writer's sense, when you have cosmic fear, it's a lack of order that horrifies us. It's the suspension or defeat of the fixed laws of nature make us feel that we are unsafeguarded against the assaults of chaos and the daemons of unplugged space. We are at the whim of malignant gods. Ooh, that's a good quote. I like that. I don't think that's a quote from, I think it's mine, but malignant or maleficent. We're at the whim of gods who don't care about us. If laws of nature, wrong button. Laws of nature are suspended or defeated in a malign way. That causes cosmic fear in Lovecraft's view, and horrifies us, and the lack of order horrifies us because of monstrosity in King's view. So for both of them, they're going to be talking. They're talking a lot about outside forces causing our world, causing the characters' world, and since we identify with the characters, our world, to seem malign or to seem unordered, lacking in order because of these aberrations, or because of the daemons of unplumbed space are suspending fixed laws of nature. We can't trust laws of nature anymore according to Lovecraft because of this. And if you read enough Lovecraft stories, you get that pretty well. And with King too, it's monsters. Because we're the Republican in the three-piece suit, we see a lack of order, and that's what horrifies us. The Republicans in the three-piece suit want the order, want their logbooks in order, but when the monster comes along, it scares us because all that stuff is not right anymore. It's malignant. It's I'm retreading ground here. I think you guys get the point. And of course, it's not as the points I'm trying to make with these guys, and the points these two guys are trying to make aren't as clear cut as they are in Carol. So Carol's the best basis. That's why I started with Carol. Because trying to get, you can get sense out of this, but you have to do it through repetition a little bit. You get a feel for it more than getting it written down in exact points. From these three quotes: certain atmosphere of breathless, unexplainable dread of unknown forces, malign and particular suspension of defeat of those fixed laws, ... and the difference between beneficent aspects of the unknown and the maleficent aspects of the unknown. You get a feel for what Lovecraft is talking about in Cosmic Fear. From these quotes, the outsider, monstrosity appealing to the conservative in us, become part of the mob, destroy the outsider, faith and belief in the norm, watching for the mutant, agent of the status quo, and lack of order. The aberration implies lack of order. So that's what you get from those ones. You get the feel for what King's trying to say. It's still not clear cut, but you get the gist. Next time, and when we're going to go on to the next section, which is the horror tale, we're going to start again with the more clear-cut Philosophy of Horror by Noel Carroll. And then we're going to go into Stephen King's Danse Macabre. Stevie. Pardon me. And we're going to talk about the horror tale. Carroll's going to be very exact in what he says the horror tale is, and fairly accurate. I have a few problems because, once again, he believes that you need to have a monster for a horror tale, and I'm more on King's side. I'm more forgiving. I did mention that Lovecraft is less forgiving even than Carroll. I'll make the point of saying another thing from page 15. The true weird tale has something more than secret murder, bloody bones, or sheeted form clanking chains. According to the rule. According to rule. To be horror, to be a weird tale, a true weird tale, he's being come on now, exclusive. Some weird tales aren't true weird tales. To be a true weird tale, you can't just have, bloody bones, secret murder, and a ghost wandering the halls, clanking chains with a sheet over his head. You need something more. You need the cosmic fear. You need to put make it seem like the world is unkind towards you, the character, and since we identify with the character, you. Finish that. Anyway. Yeah, so King, he's going to be even more exclusive than Carroll. Carroll says, well, you can have horror. It can be bad horror and still be horror. It's just bad. King says, well, you can have bad horror, obviously, as well. But you don't want to be as exclusive as Carroll either, because Psycho is a horror tale, and it's a great horror tale. Jaws is a horror tale, and it's a great horror tale. He's not very boastful about his own books, but I'll be boastful for him. Cujo is a horror tale, and it's a great horror tale. He's going to be a lot more inclusive for horror. Right, so we're going to talk about King, but first we're going to talk about Carroll's views of horror tales. Very scientific. For the most part, very accurate. When we get to the fantastic, that's the third type of horror tale in Carroll. Let me put that slide up. I'll have some issues, and we'll go over that, of course. But for the time being, the next video will be back to Carroll. We're going to be going over the complex discovery plot. The first type of plot we'll be talking about. Carroll's view is essentially that there's two main plots that horror tales go to. It's the complex discovery plot or the overreacher plot. And there's elements of the fantastic. There's a third quasi-horror tale called The Fantastic that he's going to be talking about as well. And then there's mixing and matching between them. You know, there's 4 elements of the complex discovery plot, 4 elements of the Overreacher, and you could add in the element of the Fantastic as well, and mix them all up into different views. So we'll talk about the complex discovery plot next time, and then we'll talk about it the time after that, because it's definitely a 2-parter. Yeah. And we'll talk about the Overreacher, and then we'll talk about the Fantastic, and then we'll go back to King. Because, as I said before, a lot of what King's talking about monsters, if it's a monster like the Hook, that will affect the plot. If it's a monster like vampire, Dracula, that will affect the plot. If it's a monster like the werewolf, it will affect the plot. The Thing Without a Name, Frankenstein, that will affect the plot. Ghost, that will affect the plot. Bad Place, that will affect the plot. Bad Place is sort of haunted house-ish. And Ghost sort of gets melded with Haunted House or Bad Place. So I meld that together. Ghost separated from Haunted House is still weird for me. I know that there are free-form floating ghosts or unanchoredless ghost stories that are good, but they are still weird for me. Okay, folks. Thanks for watching. Next time, we'll be going into The Horror Tale, Part B. This is Drew. I'm signing off. Thanks for watching Horror Analysis. See you next time.